I suspect that my brain and voice are going to give out during this at some point, but I'm just going to try to go for it. Over the years, I've been interested in a lot of other topics other than The Legend of Zelda, believe it or not. It's just that Zelda is the most important one, and the one I need to put my focus towards finishing above all else. But of course, that doesn't mean I don't have other interests, although maybe I'm being redundant to convince myself to. This video is an attempt to kick off several other video essay ideas that I want to do, or even that I could work on in the future. The reality isn't that cut and dry. I probably won't be able to create half of these videos. Right now, I'm predicting that the Zelda video will be the first and only video I do like this, because it's just impractical. But I'm going to start with Ratatouille. Whenever you click on an internet video claiming to have insight into the movie Ratatouille, the discussion will almost certainly open with the author claiming that Ratatouille is the best Pixar movie, or their favorite Pixar movie. This, of course, is impossible. Pixar is an animation company. Pixar doesn't make movies at all. Pixar has never made movies. And Pixar will never make movies. Anyone who actually had insight into this movie, or into movies at all, would know that directors are the ones who create movies. Even from this point, however, Disney YouTubers and the like will still to this day falsely credit Brad Bird with the movie's initial conceptualization. They think he created this world and these characters and themes, because they haven't actually listened to what Brad Bird has ever said on the subject.
But it's still the same basic idea that Jan had so many years ago. The story had so many possibilities that were really interesting. The problem with the film was that there were so many possibilities that it was tough to corral it into one story that had one emotional thrust and kind of swept the audience along. I separated the rats. They were always together, and kind of Remy was sneaking off to be in the kitchen, and that made it very hard to keep momentum going. So I actually physically separated them early on in the film. There were a lot of changes like that. I killed off Gusteau and made him a figment of Remy's imagination. I had a relationship between Gusteau and Linguini and sort of lawyerly aspects to the film that were not there before. The will and all of that stuff was not in there before. It was a way to tie things together. So there was a lot of ingredients.
But it's still the same basic idea that Jan had so many years ago.
The incuriosity on these things isn't a small exception at all. Disney's entire business model is set up in such a way to intentionally mislead people into thinking that art doesn't actually belong to the artist. They want to obfuscate the creation process and make it seem as though it takes a studio using proprietary software to make any 3D animations when, Blender's existed since the 90s. If you've ever seen any Pixar behind the scenes, you'll immediately notice how much of it is intentionally deceptive. So, for most people who have watched Ratatouille and are therefore susceptible to Disney's propaganda, it doesn't actually matter to them that they can't see the origin of the movie's thematic underpinnings, because they've never done this with any piece of media. They fully believe that one person couldn't possibly be responsible for an entire movie, because movies are just too big and too expensive and have too many moving parts. Movies to them aren't self-expression, they're merely tech demos for whatever animation software is being used. If I were to have this conversation at a serious scale, I don't think it would ever work, because the only audience who could receive the message simply wouldn't be willing or even capable of hearing it. The group of people who have watched Ratatouille and like it only exclusively like it for the worst reasons. So, for the remainder of this discussion, we just have to unlearn everything internet fandoms have led us to believe and just start from scratch, because not only are their stances on certain subjects incorrect, but their entire perspective is based on multiple falsehoods. The biggest flaw with the movie, in how it fails to capture Jan Pinkiva's actual vision, is that Remy practically abandons his family, and his absence is immediately swept under the rug.
And finding someone to replace you for Poison Checker has been a disaster. Nothing's been poisoned, thank God, but it hasn't been easy. You didn't make it easy.
I know. I am sorry, Dad.
Well, the important thing is that you're home.
I separated the rats.
Now, granted, Brad Bird set this up in such a way that Remy didn't do it on purpose, but even after Remy reunites, the only family members we have in the movie are Emil and Django. The only other rats that get any real screen time and dialogue is Git, and it's pitifully short. Now, this is of core importance to the main moral of the entire movie.
In the past, I have made no secret of my disdain for Chef Gusteau's famous motto, "Anyone can cook," but I realize only now do I truly understand what he meant. Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere.
We don't actually have enough of the sense of where Remy came from at all. So this sentiment that a great artist can come from anywhere, okay, where does Remy come from? In what ways does that contradict his ability to be an artist? There is an answer to this, but the movie in its current form doesn't address it. If a great artist can come from anywhere, where did Remy come from other than the fact that he's a rat and his family is rats?
First of all, I'm a rat.
You need to have actually developed the characters and the relationships enough to actually earn this moment. Django is relegated to a two-dimensional Disney villain, and Emil is only ever portrayed in the movie as a dim-witted sidekick. Watching the movie and trying to put yourself in Remy's place, you find that you can't. These other rats are only Remy's family because of contrivance.
We've got to go to the colony. Everyone will be thrilled.
Yeah, but...
What?
Thing is, I kind of have to...
What do you have to more than family? What's more important here?
Well,
Not that Remy feels like he's an integral part of a community, and that the community is a vital part of his life. In the real world, what prevents someone from being an artist is practicality. Take me, for example. I want to make video essays about all the things I enjoy, but reality sets in and I realize I have to work at Home Depot, and that in a best case scenario, I'm going to be dead in the year 2070. So I have to instead prioritize my goals and also work at the Home Depot, even though they support ICE. In the deleted scenes, we get into what this should have looked like in the movie. Of course, Remy would still be a chef by the day, but by night he would be participating in stealing garbage with the rest of his family in an elaborate heist. A heist is perfect, because it would require many different characters with different skill sets in their respective roles. From there, it's a matter of extrapolation. We'd be introduced to a ton of Remy's family members, and they'd all have great character moments, and contrary to what Disney would have you believe, it wouldn't have ruined the pacing of the movie to include this. It certainly wouldn't have been unnecessarily expensive.
They were always together, and kind of Remy was sneaking off to be in the kitchen, and that made it very hard to keep momentum going. So I actually physically separated them.
So during the heist, Remy is distracted because he's daydreaming about cooking instead. This is a clever inversion. If you're applying this moral to your own life, most people obviously work during the day and yearn for personal achievements at night. It shows how this relationship is different for rats, because of course during the day they'd have to hide from humans. It's relatable to me too, as someone who does work a night shift and spends the daylight hours working on what I actually want to do with my life. Now, if this were the only glimpse into this version of the movie that we got, there'd already be a lot to talk about, but it turns out this version of the story survived into the video game adaptation. For Disney's own purposes of making a promotional material, they set it up so that the movie and all the video game adaptations needed a release in parity on the same day, which meant that during development of the video game, the game devs were actually given concept art and things that, in the end, were actually cut from the movie. And in recent years, we've actually got leaked earlier versions of the video games themselves. Stray note here. The Heavy Iron interview where they said Asobo would be a great pick because the movie is French and they're French. This was dead on. Asobo actually understood and the sphere of influences that Jan Pinkiva was pulling from because they were a French studio. But of course, it's going to take a long time to parse out all of that information from the leaked video game builds. Let's just start with the information that we have from the retail version of Asobo Studios' Ratatouille. This game introduces us to Git properly, and he's a consistent side character along with 3 other rat colony members. Twitch, an unnamed rat who I've nicknamed Brad because he's voiced by D. Bradley Baker, and Celine. So, going back to the movie's concept art, you can spot them in the storyboards, and you can all see them in this portrait as well, alongside what's potentially Remy's mom. It's hard to tell. But anyway, in the game, these characters are depicted properly. Just like I said, Git is the muscle, Twitch is the bomb diffuser, Celine is a decoy, Remy's the spotter. And this remains true in the concept art. You can see Remy directing the rats past the guard dog, and you can see Remy watching for the humans. It happens on screen. It's great. Again, by setting it up this way, Pinkiva's created a story with a character that's actually grounded and relatable. In the real world, you can't up and abandon your friends and family, and trying to find a work-life balance that works for you is complicated, and the movie as it currently exists fails to address this topic directly because they simplified it.
I separated the rats.
And of course, the whole point of having a story like this is allegorical. The rats are humans.
One of the mini changes I did was the rats were all on 2 legs and I put them on 4 legs, which was actually kind of an expensive change that late in the game. But I felt that it was important to physicalize the barrier between the 2 worlds.
Leaked prototypes for the video game included music by Django Reinhardt, and it turns out Jan Pinkiva is incredibly inspired by Sylvain Chame, and all this vein of influences would need to be explored for 60 minutes in and of themselves to actually have a cohesive perspective on Ratatouille, which no popular YouTuber spewing on the subject has actually done, because they're incompetent and they don't actually care about art. Now, speaking personally for a moment, I have worked in restaurants. My first job, I was lucky enough, it was a cafeteria for a college, and as a result, they had the ability and encouraged us to compost all of our food waste. But in big fancy restaurants, so few businesses actually do that. I started working for a big restaurant in the heart of a major American city, and we had a locked door on our dumpster so that homeless people couldn't sneak in and steal it. This one time, my boss asked me to throw away over 20 bulk containers of napkins, simply because they weren't compatible with the napkin holders we had in the restaurant. Secretly, I took them home with me, and I didn't have to buy paper towels for over a year. If my boss had it his way, I'd be buying paper towels, and more than likely buying them from Dixie, which is owned by the Koch brothers, by the way. The waste of food and quote-unquote disposable materials like plastic and cardboard really deeply upset me, and I often wish that we could repurpose them. In Jan Pinkiva's world, this problem is addressed. Remy's family members living underneath Paris in the sewers have created a beautiful little town. Broken bottles are repurposed into lamps. Cardboard boxes are transformed into apartment buildings. There's even a reoccurring symbol in the level design of a food can providing a fire for this rat. This, of course, is meant to reflect the imagery of a hobo creating a fire in a public trash can. This was all intentional. Jan Pinkiva was trying to comment on these social issues of food waste, homelessness, pollution, and starvation. Remy and the other rats are in the movie to symbolize a homeless person that might be desperate enough to not just eat from a trash can, but to break into a dumpster that was locked up just to have a decent meal. So that's who the rats are. That's what they're meant to represent allegorically. That's where Remy was meant to come from. Let's go back to that overused quote from End on Ego again.
Only now do I truly understand what he meant. Not everyone can become a great artist, but a great artist can come from anywhere.
In this way, Remy's food is outsider art.
Ratatouille? It's a peasant dish. Are you sure you want to serve this to Ego?
By serving Ego ratatouille, he isn't just reminding Ego of his childhood. This message is more deeply rooted in Remy's class, not his creed. Ego can't identify with Gusteau's message. Anyone can cook, because he's too distinguished. He refuses to relate with a homeless person who might eat out of trash can like Remy and his family. Remy serving Ego this dish successfully humbled Ego. Ego is expecting to be served something with class and dignity, and instead he's given a peasant dish. It doesn't just remind him of his childhood, that's a surface-level takeaway. The message is much deeper than this. The dish reminds Ego of who he was before he became a snobby adult, and when he was still innocent enough to have emotional intelligence. Try this the next time you get a chance. Ask a 7-year-old if we should give hungry people food. Ask a 7-year-old if we should give homeless people a place to live. Ask a 7-year-old if we should end all wars. A 7-year-old is, of course, going to say yes to all of these things. You don't have to be indoctrinated to be a socialist. We're already born knowing what the right thing to do is. Instead, it's consumerism that needs to be indoctrinated into you in order for you to believe in it. A stray note, food has always been about class. There's a Twitter post about barbecue and how we have to season our food and make it taste good, and then the rich think that they can co-opt that into a luxury. And again, we come back to this idea that Ratatouille is not a Pixar movie, and it certainly isn't a Disney movie. The way that us general audiences understand and appreciate film is wrong. This central message in the movie is counter to the entire existence of Disney as a company today, to say the least. So yeah, Ratatouille isn't a Disney movie, and actually the only reason Ratatouille is worthwhile at all and worthy of discussion and worthy of being watched is exclusively in spite of Disney, in spite of Pixar, and in spite of every single parasite who stole Ratatouille from Jan Pinkiva. We shouldn't be conceding that Ratatouille is some perfect movie that's hard for Disney to ever top, and it's so untouchable that they'll ever make a sequel. It isn't. So anyway, this heist stuff would have followed Remy, and it would have forced him to live this double life. We get to see this a little bit. Like, there's one scene where Remy gets caught stealing from Linguini.
How could you? I thought you were my friend. I trusted you. What did I expect?
But in the video game, it couldn't be more obvious that this was meant to happen constantly, not once. As Gusteau's business boomed, Django's colony would be thriving alongside it by skimming off the top, or really skimming off the bottom. In the current film, Linguini's accusation and this break in his relationship with Remy here really comes out of nowhere. We know Remy hasn't been stealing food this whole time, but because he can't speak in a way that Linguini can understand him, he can't defend himself. It makes Linguini seem like the reactionary human that Django wants Remy to believe that he is. Like I said, it's very contrived. And I could keep going on about that, but I don't have a lot of time. I have a lot of topics to get to.
Ratatouille bug.
I think even if you were already a part of the infamously toxic social media in 2016, it's incredibly difficult to make the argument that, actually, it was all very healthy discourse. It can be pretty hard to remember what it was actually like. In this video, I don't want to be apologetic towards any obvious aggressors or minimize anyone's pain, but of course, you also don't need to be a genius to understand that this entire genre of YouTube didn't fade away as a natural fad. Instead, it had to be openly and deliberately censored to the point of unprofitability. And more than that, the wake of YouTube's public breakup with its own demographic made it difficult to want to mix the two any longer. Which is a shame for anyone invested in this type of content for the rhetoric and the comedy, not its subject material. All the people who enjoyed it for those reasons are, instead, not just funneled, but railroaded straight down right-wing pipelines like Rumble, through no fault of their own, and their radicalization inherently satisfies their persecution complex like a self-fulfilling prophecy. In the end, none of this was anybody's fault. Not even the deliberately transgressive, because they've reached a point where perceived guilts are themselves rationalizations for oppression. The political climate that we currently live in inherently stems from what happened during this time on YouTube, and it would be impossible to ignore how crucial Content Cop was to that. For the impatient, my conclusion is that this is and always was yet another instance of divide and conquer. This wasn't about creed, it was always about class. Google has no incentive then or now to sanitize its reputation, and this was always a deliberate scapegoat. Because, really, even in the ways that it became problematic, it was never as problematic as what Google did in reaction to it. And actually, Google scapegoated it twice by firing Susan Wojcicki, much to the disappointment of his haters, his fans, and also himself, idubbbz, in his 14 years of making YouTube videos, has actually never been wrong about anything. He never changed or 180'd in any meaningful way, and really his biggest problem is that nobody wants to listen to what he actually says, which is why I've decided to do exactly that. This discourse of YouTube in 2016 really wasn't the immature hysteria that's been mistaken for, and actually, I think the lessons learned and subsequently forgotten can be applied now to actually fix how awful everything is in politics right now. The beginning of this conversation stems from when I originally saw the Leafy Content Cop and was confused because at the time I was an active viewer of both Ian and Calvin. And I think even now I still enjoy watching both of them, but again, I want to iterate, this isn't about subject material. If you watch my videos, you know I'm a socialist. I never shut up about it. You know, I was interested in both these men for their rhetoric and their ability to speak, their charisma. I think people really get caught up on the morals about it. I would point to several videos made by the channel Counter Arguments, and I would also, of course, conclude with the Tana Content Cop, which would be the most important part of the video to get right. Ian's thesis in that video is that we can just flagrantly use slurs and choose not to be offended by them, and it'll expand our lives. And again, I want to say, I don't think Ian's wrong, but I also don't think that that's actually a path for our future. It's not realistic. The whole world isn't going to bend over backwards to make slurs acceptable. A much, much more efficient and intellectually identical option is ignoring slurs by not using them in the first place. It's actually kind of amazing that these guys, they think that hatred is omnipresent and immutable. It's really not. We aren't silencing free speech by refusing to use words and ideas. It's a personal choice. It's a personal choice that reflects on you as a person. If you're a mature adult, you obviously understand that slurs are not and have no capability of being productive. This isn't about the First Amendment. It's about your personal maturity and what kind of ass you make yourself look like. Which is where I diverge from the Counter Arguments channel. So, crossing them off the list isn't actually inhibiting anyone. There's no way to use those words without being hateful, and there's no productive way to be hateful. What it reveals is just that you're a hateful person and you're insecure about it. When big YouTubers were still allowed to expose each other, there was real, actual accountability on the platform. The few times it's happened in recent memory have been extremely healthy. Look at what happened to Pirate Software after Ross Scott had exposed him. It makes us as a community more responsible people because the punishment for saying something wrong shouldn't be automated censorship. It should be a psychoanalysis on the people we listen to speaking for on hours on end. Because if they made that mistake, it's also a mistake we made by listening to them and agreeing with them. It's a personal moment of learning. You should look at it as a moment of learning, not as a moment of censorship. That's so immature. If that's your only takeaway and you think that it's censorship, bullshit. But I also, yes, I obviously agree that YouTube shouldn't be running this bot that just, sees a curse word and it blocks your channel or whatever. That's dystopian. It's completely dystopian. It should be case-by-case basis of, like, is this person actually hateful? Is this person, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. We used to think critically about this. We used to care about how people used their words. We used to care about logical fallacies and all these things. Now people watch YouTube as background noise. And you have idiots like Moist Critical rising up and as a modern-day red-letter media just spewing ignorance directly into people's heads. And then they actually pay him for more lies because they love being lied to and told that they aren't wasting their lives by doing and aspiring to nothing by binge-watching garbage. As I guess as a segue, if you're a hateful person and you just want to watch the world burn, you might be a lot like Shadow the Hedgehog.
はい、これはすごくいい質問なんですけども、実はシャドウを作るときに、彼には影があるキャラクターというか謎多きキャラクターというイメージがありまして、いろんなことを謎のまま答えを分からずに残しておこうという思いがありました。シャドウが最後アドベンチャー2で死んだと思われたのがどうして生きてたのか、彼はアンドロイドなんじゃないかとか、そういういろんな思いが明確に答えがないまま彼は謎を持ったまま活躍するっていうキャラクターとして誕生させたので、実はなぜヘッジホッグなのかっていうのも実は大きな謎としてあえて残してあるんです。なのでちょっと皆さん想像して楽しんでください。
I'm not going to be the first person in history to observe that the internet fandom surrounding the Sonic Adventure series is at least a little bit insane, but the most out of touch with the reality claim I've seen, more than any other thing, is this idea that Sega would never, or even could never, make a Sonic Adventure 3. If you know anything about the world Takashi Iizuka created, you know that he never finished the Sonic Adventure series, and in recent years he's made it very clear that he hasn't given up on it, even though, yes, it has been on ice for over 25 years at this point. When and why he decided to pause development on a fifth entry into the series is very poorly documented, partly because it is an intentional mystery, but also because Sonic the Hedgehog exists at a space in popular culture where everyone knows of it, but they don't actually know that much about it. Something I would personally compare to Scooby-Doo, in the sense that there's no existing attempt to understand what Iowa Takamoto was trying to say with it. But of course, just because something is set up as a mystery doesn't mean that it isn't solvable from the very beginning. If you're paying attention to the things that happen in Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and Shadow the Hedgehog in isolation, and, of course, why those things happen and the meaning behind them, it's actually very easy and understandable. Eventually, explaining the overarching Sonic Adventure story also explains why Takashi Iizuka has been so distant and hesitant up until recently, because I don't think there's a single Sonic fan out there who's really ready to hear what he has to say. But before any of that, for those of you who haven't played all 4 Sonic Adventure games, or didn't pay attention to them, a recap is, of course, in order. Here is the Sonic Adventure series so far, as it was intended by Takashi Iizuka. The first thing that we learn about Iizuka's adaptation of Sonic is that all the fantasy elements from the classic Genesis games have been explained away as sci-fi. And he does this in a couple of ways. Sonic Adventure's first brand new character is Chaos. The game actually opens with a boss fight against him, rather than opening with a level. Amoeba in real life are known as a type of extremophile. Extremophiles are named such because they can survive extreme scenarios, things that would kill almost any other organisms. Things such as surviving the vacuum of space, and surviving the air friction and G-forces of entering the Earth's atmosphere. This, will be important later, so just keep it in the back of your mind. Iizuka certainly isn't the first person to extrapolate something fantasy-based into sci-fi, but I think there's a certain confusion that people have about the realities of the series and how it's fundamentally different from the Sonic that Naoto Oshima invented. People will point out a couple things in Essay 1 that call back to CD and Sonic 3, and think that definitively this means that these games exist in the same universe. And I mean, that's only technically true. Of course, for branding purposes, there's a practical reason for connecting these pieces of intellectual property. But when people talk about that, that's not what they're talking about. You genuinely see an insistence that all the Sonic games have to exist in some kind of cohesive timeline, and I also fell victim to this at a certain point in my life. Not just that the adventure games connect back to the classics, but that the adventure games also branch out into Sonic 06 and Sonic Unleashed and all that. For clarity, here's what Iizuka himself has to say about this.
日本に戻ったのが2007年でしたかね。なので結構その日本のソニックチームもこうみんなそれぞれがディレクターが考えた新しいソニックゲームを作る、皆さんご存知のソニックアンリッシュとかシークレット・オブ・リングスとかソニックの2006とかそういう誰かがトップでコントロールするんではなくて各ディレクター各プロデューサーがそれぞれのタイトルを作るっていう時代が少しあったんですね。で私がその日本に戻った時にその一人一人のディレクターたちがこう自分たちの解釈でソニックタイトルを作ってるっていう状況がすごく良くないなと思いまして、私がそれを束ねてちゃんとソニックっていうビジョンを一つに持って統一的にソニックタイトルをコントロールしようという体制を作りました。
So, not only were Secret Rings, Unleashed, and 06 all made without Iizuka's supervision, they were also created without his approval. Now, I'm sure you could make arguments for Shun Nakamura and all these other directors in their own right, which hasn't been done, by the way, I've looked. But there's zero ambiguity here. There is no connection between the Sonic Adventure and Sonic 06 or Unleashed or any of these games after Shadow the Hedgehog. It's Sonic Adventure 1, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, and Shadow the Hedgehog. Those are the only 4 games that are in discussion about canon here. Canon as defined as the creator of the series and the person actually spearheading everything. This is the part of the video where I urge you to read the credits and scroll through MobyGames.com for 3 seconds before making a bunch of lofty claims. You can argue all you want that these games are connected on a plot level. Like Sonic Battle is a big example of that, where it's like, oh, no, they're connected on a plot level. Look, if you're a new artist, you obviously want to put your story in the context of previous stories. It doesn't make them actually canon. And even if it did, the themes they explore are completely separated from each other because, again, they're made by different artists. This video just isn't about every artist who ever worked on Sonic the Hedgehog. It's about Iizuka. So if you wanted to watch a video about a different artist's interpretation about Sonic, go watch a different channel because this is not what this is about. This very much applies in the case of Sonic Adventure 1, though, where Iizuka was still working under many other artists. And of course, as with any artist, the longer their series goes on and the more budget they're allotted, makes newer entries more true to their original vision. The second thing we learn about the sci-fi version of Sonic is that Sonic lives on the same planet as humans do, and that planet is Earth. Recently, there's been some confusion about the nature of this, if Sonic still coexists with humans or not, if he always did, but Iizuka's explanation, although infamous, actually makes a ton of sense with context. Iizuka specifically says that Sonic games take place in 2 worlds. He doesn't actually specify that they're planets, although you can think of them that way. Actually, the movies have been careful to show that these worlds are a lot more like alternate dimensions that they can enter via portals, which if you know enough about astrophysics, wormholes are actually much, much more practical than spaceships would be anyway, because space is so ridiculously vast. For the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to use the word that Iizuka used, world, because I don't want to specifically speak for him. It's obvious that world could mean either planet or dimension, or even both. So when Iizuka says that Sonic games take place in two worlds, what he's saying is that there are two worlds in the story. Not that we've necessarily seen both of those worlds on screen already. This topic is touched on a little bit by this channel that I want to shout out, but I forgot the name of. If you actually went to watch that video, you would be spoiling my video a little bit, but even she doesn't get into everything. And even so, she's an outlier. Most people do not know this stuff. Or if they do, they just think it's a funny fan theory, and they don't realize that it actually has roots in what Iizuka's actually said on the topic, and what's actually in the story. Sonic really isn't the only character to be from another world. As we learn about Shadow, his DNA came from Black Doom, an alien whose home planet is actually not a planet, but a comet, which is going to be important soon, so just keep that in mind. You're probably wondering, if Sonic Adventure has all this sci-fi stuff in it, where is Iizuka pulling it from? Well, he actually just tells us in Adventure 2. J.D. Bernal helped popularize a concept known as Mars panspermia. It posits that life on Earth originated from Mars, the reason being that extremophiles exist. The only reason in biological evolution that creatures possess certain abilities is because that they had to adapt them for natural selection. So why would microbes be able to survive the vacuum of space and entering the Earth's atmosphere? Well, because they had to in order to survive arriving here from Mars. The term panspermia means that the original life form that came to Earth was from another planet and traveled to Earth via a comet. This should now sound familiar to you. This is the reason that the Knuckles tribe and Black Doom both evoke themes of Mayan temples. In the Sonic Adventure series, alien life on Earth is ancient, so even though the Sonic himself is an alien, he's never actually known his home planet since he's several generations removed from it. The main reason fans hate it on Two Worlds is literally invalid. Sonic has lived on Earth his entire life. What Iizuka means, and what he always meant, is that biologically, he's from another world. Knuckles isn't stupid for not knowing who his ancestors were, because actually all their history is left back on a completely different world. This is probably why Angel Island is a floating island. It's the comet again. The comet that carried alien life on it. Iizuka was part of the Sonic & Knuckles development team, and it's very reasonable to suggest that he could have influenced this, or he could have read into it in this way and made it retroactively canon in his interpretation. Okay, so we have macroscopic extremophiles like Chaos, and at some undefined point in the past, he guarded the Chaos Emeralds alongside the Chao. What the Chao are actually hasn't been explained, but I think we have enough context to figure out that they are single-celled organisms. They're the base form of this alien life form. We see that when you evolve your Chao in a certain way, you can make it look like Sonic or Shadow. It's not really a stretch to say, what if Sonic himself is just a mutated Chao? Mutated by, what else? The Chaos Emeralds. From here, I would get into how Shadow is the ultimate life form, what that actually means, why it matters to the story, because it has to deal with the fact that the male hedgehogs can tap into the full power of the emeralds, and so Shadow is simply an attempt to artificially create what Sonic already is. So they're both the ultimate life form. I feel like people do know that. They also know things like how things aboard the Ark are recreations of the shrine or artificial chaos and all that stuff. Gerald was researching all that stuff, and Gerald is this Nazi scientist, so ultimate life is literally referring to the master race. That's why Iizuka's pulling from J.D. Bernal, actually, because when you look at Iizuka's other primary influence, the Spawn comics, you'll see that Maria is essentially Wanda, and there's a ton of Nazi imagery in Spawn. I guess the main tie between this and Ratatouille is we need to watch Sylvian Chamet's movies, and we need to be reading the Spawn comic. But we haven't, because we don't care enough about artists. If you don't have time, it's because you didn't make time. Stop watching this video and actually do some of your own research. I'm so sick of being the only person who cares about these people as human beings.